So what I want to start with, and I'm glad that I had the liberal arts introduction because we're going to do a couple of detours into history, is for everyone to think about what your life would have been like if you had been born, not today, but in 1917 or in 1817. And generally when people do these exercises, they'll think about the usual things. The technology was different, the clothing was different, the politics were so different. But one thing that we tend to overlook is just how fixed our lives used to be, really over the course of human history. And when I say fixed, what I mean is that people didn't move cities or towns. It was rare for them to do that. People tended to stay in the same types of professions that their parents had. They would typically stay in their same class, in their same socioeconomic group. And in addition to all of these things that were fixed, the other thing that was fixed, which we overlook, is values. And people who were born, to the son of a knight would know that he would have to be brave no matter what. The son of a baker or the daughter of a baker would be very industrious. And when we think about the trajectory of human life in those terms, we realize just how much things have changed literally, certainly over the last 100 years, but even over the last 10 or 15. So when I was a child, one of my favorite books was The Three Musketeers. And I'm sure everyone has some familiarity with the story, but where it begins is with this young man leaving Gascony to go seek his fortune in the big city of Paris. And the thing that his father says to him that is very interesting to me, especially as I look back on it now, is he says, here's your letter, go see this guy, he's the captain of the Musketeers, here, take this horse, here, take, my last money. But the most valuable thing is he says, look, you're a Gascon from Gascony, so you have to be brave. And if someone challenges you, if they say something to you, if they look at you the wrong way, you have to fight no matter what. And now dueling is illegal, so you really have to fight now, because then people will really respect us. And when you think about it now, what's astounding about this is that he's giving him a very specific value. And today, we don't have that. I don't know the last time that I heard a parent say, you have to be honest, or you have to be brave, or you have to be wise, and singling something out specifically, not just this general bucket of, be a good person, this is the moral high ground, but this particular thing defines not just who you are, but it defines our family. It's defined our family for generations. It's defined the people from our province for generations. This is your value, and I'm handing it to you. Wrong button. Okay, clearly this is not my value. Okay, there we go. So, enter the millennial generation. Now, this is a trend that has been shaping up over the better part of the century. So this is not something super new, but it's super accentuated. And for the millennials in this room, you guys already know this. 50% of millennials don't identify with a political party. 1/3 don't belong to an organized religion. Maybe their parents did, but they don't. 59% live somewhere else other than where they grew up. And most of them have worked an average of 3 jobs in the 5 years since graduation. So what this tells me is that millennials not only are disassociated from these standard pockets of identity, but they also don't have those other values that come with them. And so as a result, what they're doing is they're doing this great emotional work of forging their own set of values. Wait, okay, there we go. So millennials, I think I have to keep my finger on this so I don't lose it. Millennials don't inherit an identity. They create one. And this is a great sentence, right? It's very pithy, you can quote it, but what this actually means is that the people that are millennials, the people that will come after them, whether that's Generation Z or some other generation, and certainly the people that came slightly before millennials have large chunks of this characteristic as well. You're doing the emotional work every day of saying, who am I? Do I want to be known for being smart? Do I want to be known for being brave or clever or creative or crafty? Do I want to protect the environment? Do I want to save trafficked children? Who am I? This is a huge question. And in some ways, this path of self-discovery is really new to humanity because for the longest time, you knew. And for a lot of us, it sucked because we didn't like it, right? There are kings who were very unhappy, just as there were beggars and peasants who were very unhappy and wanted something different. But this is where your business really comes into play. Because the other interesting thing that millennials are doing is they are looking to define themselves in the types of businesses that they patronize, the types of products they buy. It's not just a car. It's not just a jacket. It's not just a restaurant I go to. But I want to actually feel that my values are in alignment with the values of this place that I'm patronizing, and I want to use this relationship to help define me, to help me define who I am. So I'm not being defined by the political party or the church that I go to. I'm being defined by what's on my Instagram feed. I'm being defined by what I'm wearing. I'm being defined by what I'm driving, where I'm going on vacation, how I'm going on vacation. Brand identification is driven by self-congruity. So a consumer will buy brand X if it reduces the discrepancy between them and their ideal self. This is really interesting to me when we dug up this stat. Millennials are actually more brand loyal than any other generation, and that may surprise you. 3 out of 4 will pay extra for a sustainable product offering. Social media actually transforms the interaction because it goes beyond just a purchase. Not only are you buying something, you're paying money for it, but then you're continuing to represent that brand not because you're getting paid for it or there's some sort of kickback or there's some other extra coin or something, but because you genuinely believe in what that brand stands for. So what does this mean for us sitting in this room as we build our businesses? Most of your customers, if they're not millennials now, they will be millennials, and if they're not going to be millennials, they're going to be the generation that comes after that accentuates these exact traits. Millennials want brands that broadcast their values. If you're going to remain neutral in things where you have a strong opinion and a strong position, that's going to hurt you. Uber is a case in point, right? We've all read all those articles. They were shared all over Facebook. Oh my gosh, Uber broke this strike. How could they have done that? People were taking the app off of their phones. But it doesn't have to be that big, right? We used to live in a world where you could have a brand identity, and that brand identity would be Coca-Cola believes in, peace and love or whatever. You have to go deeper now. You have to actually connect with your customers on an individual level and engage in really concerted and really focused storytelling so that you can tell them, hey, this is where I've come from. This is how I've built this company. This company isn't about this product. This company is about something bigger. It's about this set of values, and I want you to come with me and be a part of it. And that's how you're going to get them engaged. Leadership is about inspiring belief. That's what it is at its core, right? If you ask me to think about what makes a good leader, what's sort of the one thing that you can't do without, it's this element of belief. And today, because of all of these things that I've outlined for you, that belief has become more important than ever. It used to be just, this is a commodity product, we're going to buy the cheapest thing. And now, even if you're a B2B company and you're selling into a millennial or to someone older or younger that tends to share these traits, and they see that your company actually stands for something and you have a core message behind it, they're going to connect emotionally on a level that's going to help that purchasing decision, and that's going to maintain and foster that engagement. The other interesting thing is that if you're able to take this step and build your own storytelling to inspire belief, you get all of this payback. You can increase your employees' creativity. You can increase job satisfaction, productivity, organizational commitment. Maybe I can share this deck so you can click through and actually see where we pulled these. But when you're storytelling about real things, about things that genuinely matter, whether it's Elon Musk resigning from a council or artists signing their names on a petition, then you're becoming more effective at getting your followers to commit to change. And those followers can be your customers, those followers can be your employees. And that's really important. If you can be a more effective leader for your employees, any level of storytelling and committing to issues is going to be worth it. So my company, as you may have put two and two together, we focus on content. Content sounds a little bit like a throwaway now because everyone uses it, so sometimes we come back to this word storytelling. And sometimes people will say, well, you know, there are no attention spans, no one reads anymore, the web has just bombarding people with information. How can you do what you do? And that's because of this. The interesting thing is devices have made things much more accessible. So although people have super short attention spans, if they see a well-written article, they'll spend 4 times the amount of time that they would on anything else on that. 51% of people use social media as a source of news, but only 12% actually trust it. And when people are looking for whether or not they should trust a piece of content, they look at the news organization that produced it. And that was really interesting and heartening to me. So, in spite of the fact that everything is so short, and we talk about people looking at cat videos nonstop, readers will actually engage more meaningfully and more deeply on a long-form article than on short-form content. Which brings me to the second piece of information that I wanted to share. When we look at the scope of human history and think about all of these great people that have accomplished these amazing things, the people who have ended up in textbooks, whose statues or portraits are in our museums or in our town squares, what never fails to stun me is sometimes how few people living at the time they actually impacted. 600 years ago, a village was between 30 and 500 people, right? That's super tiny. A big city was 12,000 people. By the way, articles aside, this is the size of a small business, very small. This can sometimes be a medium business. So if you're the CEO of a company today, you directly impact more people's lives than a local lord or duke of a city. And that's insane, right? And by the way, if you're some ancient lord or duke and you're controlling a city of 12,000 people, most of the time they're out farming or they're doing something, and once a year you kind of ride through and you collect money that they owe you and they sort of see you from afar. If you're the CEO of this company, every single day you impact what all of these people do. You can come and say, okay, you know what, today we're committing to this initiative. Today I've decided that we're going to also launch a nonprofit to fight human trafficking, or less dramatically than that. Today we're going to take this stand about the way that energy is used in the U.S. because I don't like what our government is doing with it, and I want to implement this. And then you also control their lives actually from like 9 to 5. So the amount of power that you have as an entrepreneur is enormous. You start small, and then you grow, and you can not only change the other parts of the world, what your company does, the customers you reach, but the lives of the people that work for you. And that's a tremendous amount of power. And then with respect to content, this is the other thing that I like to share with our clients about finding and using your voice. I wrote this article for Forbes. It did very well. There were nearly 30,000 people that read it. That's 3 big cities in medieval Europe. And those people actually read my words. Hopefully all of them. Maybe they clicked away and got bored. But that's an extraordinary amount of reach. So, I lured you in with this exciting title about the police officer. And part of the reason that I did that is because the work that we do, and I'll talk about our company in a lot more depth in a minute, is related to helping people tell complex stories, or sometimes stories that they think are boring, and to be able to tell them in ways that are fresh or exciting or lend new perspective to it. So I'm going to start with this, and then you'll see where the narrative goes. I was born in Russia. I moved here when I was 5 years old, and I've thought about visiting with my kids. And when I visited by myself, it was fine. It felt very safe. But when you have kids, it ups the ante on everything. You start to worry about crazy things. And at one point I thought, if I were in a situation where I needed to bribe a police officer, could I do it? What would it look like? The background is that I'm not very good at bribing people. And I don't say that as a point of moral pride. It's genuinely just a skill set that I don't have. So, and I learned this, by the way, because when I was in my early 20s, I wanted to be super cool with a couple of friends in a very long line at a club. And I remember coming up to the bouncer and had a 20 in my hand, and I was like, I know I'm supposed to do something with this 20, and I remember that clearly whatever I said or did was the wrong thing, because he looked very confused. Eventually I managed to hand him the 20 and walk into the club, but he had this look on his face that was basically like, this interaction did not go the way it was planned. So I knew I had to do my research. So I talked to friends, and I called around, and I researched online, and there are two ways that you can bribe a police officer. First, you should know that you need to be very careful, because if you insult them or it's perceived as actually giving them a bribe, they will A, be offended, and B, worry that you're trying to trap them. So you can never ever call it a bribe. What you would do is first, you would notice that they were looking for a bribe because the officer would want to talk to you for much longer than necessary. In the US, if you're being, arrested or ticketed, they come in, hopefully not arrested, they come in, they tell you what's going on, they send you your ticket, give you your ticket, and you're off on your way. In Russia, I could say, well, let me tell you again why what you did was so serious. You could say, well, why don't you sit down, let's talk for a couple minutes. And then hopefully you realize the fact that they're trying to find a bribe. And so at that point you could say one of two things. You could say, gosh, officer, I realize what I did was so serious, and I'm very sorry, and I'm sure there's a fine. Can you help me understand how I can pay that fine? And if they're looking for a bribe, what they'll say is, well, you can, and in fact, very conveniently, you can pay it right here, right now. This is very easy. And then you finish the transaction. The second mechanism is you can go and you can say, officer, and you would do this. If you hadn't been arrested, if they hadn't mentioned anything, they were just sort of harassing you and maybe asking you for documents or papers that you didn't have, then you would say, officer, you do so much work for the community, and I'm just so grateful. And to show my appreciation, I know that you have a fund, maybe it's a police officer's support fund, and nothing would make me happier than to give you a donation to that fund. Would it be possible to do that? And if they're looking for a bribe, they would say yes. Now that you guys all know that, and you will be very safe in Russia, next slide. So this says how to bribe a police officer in America, and there's this picture that I actually was not allowed to technically, so I had to cut it out and enlarge it because it was fuzzy, but it says, I can't afford a lobbyist, I'm the 99%. And the point that I'm trying to make is that we have this narrative around America really being a place where the rule of law is very firm and solid. And generally, if you're, probably if you're a middle-class white person, you do feel that way. There are certainly tons of corner cases where that's not true. But when I introduce the topic to you like this, and we talk about, all of these mechanisms for bribing a police officer in Russia, and you realize, really, if you have money, anyone can do it. And then we kind of shift focus to America. Clearly, from this point on, what I would do is I would talk to you about lobbyists, I would talk to you about campaign finance reform, I would talk to you about all the different ways in which private interests influence our laws, and maybe that's negative, and this is how I would frame a topic that otherwise could be played out or boring, or maybe just like you're not listening because you've heard this before so many different times. But when I begin with, let's see if I can go back. When I begin with this and kind of tell you my personal story, then you're much more primed. You're ready to hear this. And maybe you don't agree with me. Maybe this is not what you want to hear. But at least we can frame this narrative. And I brought this up because we were talking to a prospective client in the political space and sort of brainstorming, and I came up with this structure and this way of framing the piece. But that takes me to Hippo. Another thing that I will point out, and this is another element of storytelling and something that I wanted to share with you tonight. Hippo reads came last. And this is intentional. When we work with companies and we teach them to build a narrative, there are a lot of people that want to put the company front and center. Their first instinct, and this is an instinct of a good entrepreneur, is to jump in and say, okay, this is what I'm doing. This is why what I'm doing is amazing. This is why I'm going to sell, 1,000 units or reach 1 million people. But if you're trying to craft a genuinely engaging story that's going to reach millennials, it's going to reach a deeper audience, you need to focus on your expertise first, and then you can focus on yourself second. So hopefully what I've done here tonight through all of these slides and this narrative is I've shown you that I know what I'm talking about. And now you're ready to hear about my entrepreneurial journey, about what we've created with content, all the clients that we work with, how we help them storytell. If I had flipped it in reverse, you guys are all here, you signed up, you're seated, you can't really leave, so maybe you'd still be open to it. But when you're writing content on the internet, which is where most content lives, you don't have that luxury. You don't have 50 or 60 people in a room with closed doors. You have someone with a mouse who can click away and little ads popping up and someone's phone texting. And so if you want them to be genuinely interested and engaged and pay attention to what you're saying, you need to up your game. And you need to make sure that your storytelling is really, really tight. So on that note, I did the very smart thing of not turning on my timer. I feel like I have about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to spend some time sharing what Hippo Reads is and how we founded it. So my co-founder Kate and I met in a writing group, and we had both wanted to do something entrepreneurial for a while. And when we started sharing common interests, what kept coming up, and hopefully this will be as well received as it could be in this particular space, because we love academia, and we kept feeling that academia was being underutilized. When we looked at the numbers, what we found is that academics, there are a lot of them, they're very smart people, they're focused on sometimes narrow, sometimes broad spaces that are very interesting. But connection to the outside world, out of the ivory tower, is not something that's very well done, either within academic institutions or by the academics themselves. And this particular number, I always find very interesting that we have a lot of PhD students not. In addition to that, if you look at these, you think of a professor as someone who's tenured and very kind of financially secure and secure in their profession. That's just not true. And this is a crisis within academia that has been building for a while. I think many of you are probably aware of it. But it's also particularly exacerbated by the fact that academics are taught that publishing in journals is kind of the holy grail. It's the end-all and be-all. And it's true that that's what you need to do if you want to be tenured. The truth is that we're turning out many more PhDs than we'll ever find positions, much less tenured ones. This was a distressing number for us, that of the 1.5 million articles academics publish, 50% are only read by 2 people, and that is the author and the editor. And 90% are never cited. And the more upsetting thing is you would think, looking at these numbers, that you would be seeing, what is this? Is this like garbage research? Does no one want to read it? Is it just so boring? Is it irrelevant? It's not the fact that the actual research is boring or irrelevant or uninteresting. It's the fact that academic journals are often firewalled. They're super expensive. The people that actually want to read them often can't read them. They do a very poor job of reaching out either to the general public or to private industry. And on top of it, the way that academics are trained to write in academic journals is, there are a lot of reasons for it, but it's kind of the opposite of what I've laid out for you guys as a storytelling framework. It's, it's heavy, dense language. It's something that is so complex and convoluted that often a chemist reading a physics journal will struggle with it. And, we'll be able to read it ultimately, but we'll need to really work at it. So what we wanted to build was a new model where we could do 2 things. We wanted to teach academics how to publish for the general public. So we said, think about the work that you're doing and find a different voice for it. I want you to find the Atlantic voice, the New Yorker voice. If they come calling at your front door and say, I want you to write about what you're writing, but for our audience, how would you say it? How can you do it without dumbing down the actual content, but making it a little bit more interesting and engaging? And this wasn't easy. And after we launched, we had a stable of editors. We sent them out to academic conferences. We sent them to universities. We forged partnerships with different centers across various universities. But through this, we developed a stable of academics, most of whom were up and coming. So that's who we defined as PhDs, junior postdocs, junior professors, master's candidates, who really agreed with our mission and wanted to go ahead and learn how to write for this audience that was not an audience comprised solely of academics. The second thing that we wanted to do is we really wanted to include private industry in this. Because what was also upsetting to us is that often private industry ends up reinventing the wheel because they don't know that there's this academic at this research institution or in this anthropology department that happens to be working on just what they need. And when they reinvent the wheel, they pay a lot more for it than all those people get on food stamps. So to fix this, and we've drawn academics for Hippo leads from top universities. So today what we are is actually two things. Part one is this, Hippo leads, and we think of this as medium for academics. So academics are invited to publish here. This is where they write when they don't want to be writing for journals. This is where they translate their work. And by writing here, they're automatically included in our academic network. And what we use our academic network for is this, Hippo Thinks. So this is the revenue generating portion of our business. We have clients, let me see if we have the client list. So we have huge clients, we have a lot of small ones too. This is a partial list. And what all of these clients have in common is that they want smart content and they don't know how to produce it. And the reason that many of these clients didn't know how to produce smart content, and when I say content, I'm talking about, the CMO of Verizon wants to write an article for Forbes. I'm talking about the founding partner of Mucker Labs wants to write something for TechCrunch. I'm talking about US Bank wants to write a blog series for retirees. What they were doing that I thought was very interesting, and this is an opportunity that we capitalized on, is they were hiring ghostwriters and they were not hiring anyone who really understood their space. So when they were handing content assignments out, they would say, oh, like here, this is what I need done. And often it would be very complex. And they would get content back that was poorly done. It wasn't the type of storytelling that I kind of outlined for you. And part of that reason is that good storytelling also needs good research behind it. And that's where the academics come in. So what we've done is we've pulled academics from Hippo Reads, paired them with writers in Hippo Thinks, and as a result, we've turned out exceptional content for these companies as well as many other ones. And these are all the publications where we've managed to place our clients. And that takes us up to today. In the audience, we have some of our lovely Hippo